Welcome to the Sixplainer. Okay, we're jumping right into what's probably the ultimate sports trivia debate today to uncover the really fascinating linguistic history behind the word soccer. If you've ever found yourself caught in a cross-Atlantic argument over what to call the beautiful game, you are absolutely going to want to hear this. It's a story packed with twists, turns, and honestly, a whole lot of irony.
So let's just address that classic internet debate head-on. Who's actually wrong here? You know the debate. If you've spent even 5 minutes on sports forums, you've seen global fans passionately and sometimes pretty ruthlessly mocking Americans for saying soccer instead of football. It's practically a daily occurrence. You've probably seen the memes or maybe heard the exasperated sighs from European fans when an American brings up their favorite soccer team.
It's a linguistic showdown that pits two incredibly loyal, passionate fan bases right up against each other. On one side, you've got the classic, round, bouncing ball. On the other, the oblong gridiron pigskin. It really feels like this irreconcilable cultural divide, right? Fans of the round ball insist their game actually uses feet and a ball, making their word the only logical choice. Meanwhile, gridiron fans fiercely defend their sport's entrenched history. But we're about to drop a massive historical twist on you regarding where these words actually came from that might just silence the loudest critics.
Because here's the truth, and this usually shocks the diehards. The word soccer is not an American invention. At all. It is actually 100% British. Yeah, no way, right? The exact word that triggers so much international outrage, the very term that gets Americans laughed right out of European pubs, was literally born in England.
So how in the world did that happen? Well, we need to travel back to 19th century London to figure it out. Let's zero in on a huge pivot point in sports history, the year 1863. That's the year the rules of the game were finally standardized and officially codified. Because before this, football was just this chaotic, free-for-all mix of games played in schools and villages, and everyone had totally different rules. Some allowed picking up the ball, others definitely didn't. They desperately needed a unified system.
When the English finally formed their governing body in 1863, they didn't just call it football. They officially named the sport association football. This was to clearly and officially separate it from the other popular variations going on at the time, mostly rugby football. They needed a very specific, defining title to set the standard, and association was the winner. It was formal, it was official, and it set the rules moving forward.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. We have to talk about the slang culture at elite universities like Oxford back then. These students were completely obsessed with shortening words. It was this massive linguistic trend to take long, formal names and just slap an suffix on the end. They did it with almost everything. A super famous example of this, the sport of rugby quickly became affectionately known as rugger. It was just the absolute height of cool, posh slang.
So following that exact same slang trend, the really clunky formal title of association football naturally got shortened by these university students to simply ASUC. And then, applying that favorite Oxford suffix, ASUC quickly morphed into the incredibly catchy slang word we know today, soccer. So, it wasn't some clumsy American misinterpretation. It was literally the trendy, posh slang of the English academic elite.
Right, so when the sport crossed the Atlantic in the early 20th century, America ran into a bit of a dilemma. The US was already aggressively developing its own massive domestic sport, gridiron football. To avoid total cultural confusion, the most logical solution was just to adopt the popular British slang, soccer, for the round ball game. It was a totally practical, sensible choice based entirely on the vocabulary England handed them. They already had a football, so they just enthusiastically borrowed England's alternative. Americans adopted the word purely out of practicality, which brings us to an incredible historical irony. If America just borrowed the word, why does Britain hate it so much today? Seriously, how did an entire nation suddenly suffer collective memory loss about their very own linguistic invention? It's honestly one of the wildest twists in modern sports culture. The actual creators of the word somehow becoming its biggest critics.
Well, the shift definitely didn't happen overnight. Back in the early 1900s, the word soccer was totally widespread and completely acceptable in the UK. Actually, right up until the 1970s and 80s, British commentators, famous players, and national newspapers used soccer completely interchangeably with football right at home. It was entirely normal. Nobody batted an eye. But then, in the late 20th century, it was abruptly and deliberately abandoned.
Why the sudden shift? The UK only fully abandoned the word soccer in the late 20th century for one simple reason: it started getting way too popular in the United States.
as the sport absolutely blew up in America under the name soccer, especially when the North American Soccer League took off and huge international stars headed stateside. The British cultural relationship with the word just soured and fast.
And this brings us to a really fascinating and, frankly, hilarious historical label. The British public suddenly started viewing the term as this invasive Americanism. They reacted to it as if it were some foreign import corrupting their traditional game, completely forgetting, of course, that those 19th century Oxford students were the undeniable inventors of it. The backlash was severe, and the word became basically taboo in the very country that birthed it.
So, the next time you're wading into the comments section of this global debate, or, just sitting with friends at a sports bar, remember to drop this history bomb. Don't blame America, blame Oxford. America didn't change the name out of ignorance or arrogance. They literally just kept using England's old, perfectly authentic slang long after the English decided to ditch it.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder here. If the ultimate, stereotypically American sports word is actually entirely British in origin, what other historical linguistic assumptions are we getting completely wrong today? Like what other supposed Americanisms are actually just forgotten pieces of British history hiding right in plain sight? Thank you for watching this explainer. Keep seeking out the true history behind the things we take for granted, and we will catch you next time.